All right. What I'd like to offer today is some guided practice and silence, some mix of guided and silent for about the next 25 minutes. And then for the final half hour of our hour together, I'd like to offer a brief talk and some discussion, perhaps a little practice, perhaps a song. We'll see how it unfolds on the topic of integrity, which is a really important part of our journey, and it kind of gets often gets less airspace than the superstars of our practice, like mindfulness and loving kindness, and very related, um, but a particular aspect of practice I want to talk about today. So, but first, let's get present here and enjoy some practice, and maybe beginning. Um, well, of course, with tuning into your body. If it's comfortable, you can close your eyes. It's also always fine in practice to open them whenever you wish. Um, the purpose of closing our eyes is to feel more relaxed and also to um, minimize distraction. But for any number of reasons, including sleepiness, it's sometimes wise to open our eyes. So we find our own way with that. And touching in perhaps to your intention for practice. One of the two of the significant things that we're doing with practice. One is learning over and over in each moment of mindfulness that we are not obliged to identify with thought. Thought has a place, it's important, and it's also often can be distracting, distressing, and we don't have to be identified with it. So each moment of mindfulness brings us to this other way of knowing, this kind of wise, awake awareness, non conceptual, non judgmental, but perceptive and intelligent. And we don't experience it like from the thinking mind looking down, but rather from within and all around our entire body. Each moment of mindfulness, we're both relocating our center of gravity from the thinking mind and locating it into this awake awareness, which, as we know, has the potential to not only bring peace and perspective in the present moment, but also guide us to more and more wisdom and insight. So, feeling your body. If you're sitting, noticing the sitting posture. If you're lying down, noticing that. And that sense, the vibration, the connection, the contact between your body and the surface beneath you. And then as you sense into that sensation, can let go of the concept of body and just feel it as an energy, a kind of a bridge between your body and the earth. And it can be helpful in practice to Choose an anchor, a kind of a homecoming place, knowing that we've got so much conditioning to like almost magnetize ourselves back up into thinking that having a place you can kind of habitually return to. For many of us, that's the sensations of breathing. And for some of us, that might be touch points in the body or the experience of hearing. But choosing some constellation of sensations in the present moment that you can return to. And then the practice is simply inhabiting the present moment or returning to it with no, that is the practice. So there's no judgment. It's just about learning to return. Practicing, familiarizing and deepening into this other way of knowing that's innate to us. We're not inventing anything. We're simply reconnecting with something that's already here. Awake, intelligent, loving awareness. It's not thought, but it includes thought. It's not the five senses, but it includes them. And it permeates them. And it's this very simple, so close you can't see it almost, this very simple knowing. So have about 10 minutes of silent practice. And then right before we ring the bell, I'll come back in with a little more guidance. We'll ring the bell in about 2 or 3 minutes. These last moments, inviting that intention again around well-being, peacefulness, clarity, insight, whatever it is that really brings you to practice, inviting it in again. Intention is a very powerful GPS for action. Thank you for your presence and for your practice. Okay, so maybe stretch if you want to. Wiggle around a little bit. We have another half hour together. Okay, let's see here. Yeah, so I wanted to talk today about integrity and just full disclosure, I've been teaching a series on engaged Buddhism, my communities up here in Berkeley, and integrity came up as a really important and sometimes, as I was mentioning before, not as discussed aspect of practice. Just to say that Thich Nhat Hanh, back in the 1960s in Vietnam during the Vietnam War, as he was encountering like the immense suffering going on there, he was motivated by the integrity aspect of practice, which I'll talk about more in a minute in terms of like the various details, but he was motivated by that to start the Order of Interbeing, which was at that time simply 7, I think total, maybe 8 young people who really based their engaged Buddhism, and Thich Nhat Hanh coined the term, they're going out into the community to directly address suffering on both sides of the conflict. They really based their courage, their action, their clarity, their mindfulness on the foundation of ethics and virtue. They started with the basic precepts for monastics and then honed it into what still exists today as the 14 mindfulness trainings that people in that tradition will take up. And so feeling into the power of deciding to operate out of compassion and then to somewhat codify that, not as a way of guilt or punishment or anything, but rather to codify it so that we have a map and we can refer to it. It's helpful when the thinking mind kind of knows, like I was saying before about intention, what direction we're going. So this is true also of the Buddha's time. And there are what are called precepts. Many of you are aware of them, both for lay people and monastics. And they, as I say, they are more than they're more than an external application or map, although they are that. They're also an expression of an awakened consciousness, because part of awakening is beginning to really, with mindful awareness, with this awake awareness that we have as part of our functioning apparatus, as with the human body and system and nervous system and brain and heart, is we have this capacity to know through direct awareness. And part of the insight that arises from that is that we're much less a separate self than we think we are, and that we're much more interconnected with all life and all beings in the earth. And as we not only understand that intellectually, but actually experience it directly through awake awareness, through mindfulness, then integrity becomes, and for most of us this is already the case, but it can deepen and widen endlessly. Integrity becomes an innate, an obvious, intuitive, natural way of responding. So when the Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree, had his awakening, then sat there for several more weeks, sort of integrating and figuring out how to communicate what he'd seen, the primary teaching that he formulated and that he continued to teach for the remaining 45 years of his life as the central Buddhist teaching, the original turning of the wheel, is the Four Noble Truths. And the Four Noble Truths are that there is suffering. Number one, there is suffering. Number two, an innocent kind of ignorance, a not knowing how life really works, what actually brings peace. So ignorance, and then the craving that arises out of that ignorance, that craving to control impermanent experience, push away, grab and grasp. That this is the cause of suffering. And that the third noble truth, peace is possible. There is a possibility of liberation from the difficulties that exist for us all here on this relative realm. And then the fourth noble truth, that the path that we take to realize this liberation, enlightenment, freedom, alleviation of suffering, increase of well-being and peace, increase of clarity of mind, wisdom, is by leading a compassionate life, which involves 3 components: wisdom, meditation, which is this work we do now, this kind of directly accessing this other way of knowing. So wisdom, which comes from both the meditation practice and also from discussions of, helping the thinking mind understand what really does lead to peace, what really actually does based on direct experience. So wisdom, meditation, and then the third one is integrity, or it's often translated as virtue or ethics. But I like integrity, which has a similar kind of meaning, where we're in kind of in alignment with our deepest values, with a sense of goodness and interconnection. So those are the three kind of umbrella teachings, and we need all three of them. They're the teachings of the Eightfold Path, the Fourth Noble Truth. Wisdom teachings, which show up as wise understanding and wise intention. Meditation teachings, which show up as wise effort, wise mindfulness, and wise concentration. And then the third is integrity teachings. Wise speech, wise action, wise livelihood. The definition of integrity, why I like the word, it's just, I don't know, for me, more interesting and accessible and solid. And if you look it up in the dictionary, it has two meanings, both very applicable. The first is the quality of being honest and having strong moral principles. And then the second definition is the state of being whole and undivided. And part of the teaching about why integrity is so critical to awakening is that when we are distracted, divided, fragmented by confusion, remorse, overwhelm, distress, it's hard to access these states of, meditative calm and wisdom insight states. So this is a quote about integrity from a treatise on the Paramis by Acharya Dhammapala. The perfection of integrity, which in Pali is called sila, should be thought about as follows. Even the waters of the Ganges cannot wash away the stain of hatred, yet the water of integrity is able to do so. Even yellow sandalwood cannot cool the fever of craving, yet integrity is able to remove it. Integrity is the unique adornment of good people, surpassing the adornments cherished by many folk, such as necklaces, diadems, and earrings. Integrity should be reflected upon as the basis for rapture and joy, as granting immunity from fear and self-reproach, the reproach of others, punishment, and praised by the wise as the root cause for freedom from remorse, as the basis for security. Integrity surpasses material wealth because thieves cannot confiscate it, because it enables one to achieve supreme sovereignty over one's own mind. Integrity surpasses the sovereignty of warriors, kings, and priests. Remember, this is an ancient teaching. Integrity surpasses the achievement of beauty, for it makes one beautiful even to one's enemies. It cannot be vanquished by the adversities of aging and sickness. Since it is the foundation for states of happiness, integrity surpasses such dwellings as palaces and mansions. In accomplishing the difficult task of self-protection, integrity is superior to troops of elephants, horses, chariots, and infantry, as well as such devices as mantras, spells, and blessings, for it depends on oneself, not on others. Thus, esteeming integrity as the foundation of all achievements, as the soil for the origination of all the Buddha qualities, the beginning, footing, head, and chief of all the qualities issuing from in Buddhahood, one can guard diligently and thoroughly perfect integrity as a hen guards her eggs. I love that. No, just that natural knowing that something's precious and guarding and tending to it just innately. So I just pause for a moment and invite you to consider what supports your integrity when you're like in touch with your values and your kindness, your compassion, your courage, your clarity. What supports that? And as you think about what might support that, if you would like to put it in the chat, that would be supportive to all of us. What supports your integrity? We live in this culture that, can pull us away from it so easily. Connection, meditation, love for my family, clear intention. Beautiful. Yeah. Yeah, those are all, the language of the Buddha, connection is Sangha, right? Meditation, of course, is self explanatory. Love for family, that deep, unconditional love that the Buddha describes as loving kindness, but we know it directly. Clear intention, so powerful, coming back to the present moment and to our intentions can really guide us to our integrity. Aspirations for the future, absolutely. Yeah, that moving toward what Dr. Martin Luther King called the slow arc of justice, moving toward the direction of our deep integrity, aspirations for the future, and spending time in silence. Yes, thank you. Beautiful. Yeah, so having, there are so many energies outside and within us that can very easily call us away from our deepest integrity. So, all of these things that you're mentioning, morals, yes, all of these things that you're mentioning bring us back to that guidepost of our deepest integrity. So referring back to the Eightfold Noble Path, the fourth noble truth. So there is suffering, and it's caused essentially by ignorance. We can be free of that ignorance and that cause of suffering. And the way we do it is through coming into the present moment repeatedly and continually as possible with meditation, with practicing wisdom and understanding of what actually does bring peace. The kind of wholesomeness that brings peace, and then um, these integrity practices. So that, and they all support each other. So practicing with integrity, morals, ethics of body and speech is also in the moment when we're coming back to these supports of community, intention, practice, silence, all that. When we're coming back to that, that is a moment of deliberate meditative practice. So our integrity practice, when it's conscious, and even when it's flowing out of a habituated behavior, is supporting our meditation, and it's fully in alignment with wisdom. And then also, meditation and wisdom support us in our integrity practices with goodness and clear understanding. So they these practices they're all sort of like a hologram reflecting different aspects of the awakened insight. When the Buddha began teaching, he saw that everyone wants to be happy. And most of us are, because of just the way our minds evolved, what happens with the thinking survival brain has kind of taken center stage for the past few thousand years and lost touch with this other way of knowing. And as a result, we are really very much recipients of the conditioning of we get happiness by grasping and pushing away. And what we're not seeing because we're not stopping to look as much, which is what mindfulness is that the grasping and the pushing away is actually exacerbating our suffering. And clearly, we can see how that's happening around us in our world. So he started to teach. He said, "I see people wanting to be happy and taking a road to deep suffering. So let me teach." And his first teachings, before he started teaching about mindfulness, the first teachings were about generosity and integrity or sila, virtue, ethics. And in the Buddhist understanding, we cannot really set sail on spiritual insight without first embracing generosity and integrity. So he taught those first. They show up first in the list of 10 qualities of the awakened heart, which is called the paramis. Generosity and integrity show up before wisdom as practices, and also simplicity, renunciation. They show up before wisdom as practices that are foundational to awakening. So we cultivate both an inner life of love and compassion and awareness. And that is expressed outwardly through generosity, care, and restraint. And restraint isn't a very popular word, but it is a part of what we need to do. With mindfulness, we need to find those moments where our reactivity, urgently as it wants to be expressed in the moment because of habit, our reactivity wants to speak out. And we learn, oh, what did the Buddha teach, right? Patience is the supreme virtue. There are many times when integrity requires restraint. Whether the habit energy wants us to push something away with ill will, with anger and hate, which is natural but not helpful, or when the habit energy wants us to grasp something with craving, with this mistaken belief that it will somehow bring us lasting happiness. So our integrity has us work with both. So I'm just tracking the time. I want to bring us to a practice too. So I'll just say a few more things about integrity, and then we'll have a discussion and a little more practice. So the precepts, so there are many guidelines, practices, or sometimes they're called 5 things, which is helpful because in Western culture, these precepts, they are very similar to commandments and other kinds of guidelines that we get in Judeo-Christian tradition. And there is a lot of overlap that's really beautiful. And also there's a different motivation that can be helpful for us, for those of us who have found some of the dogma of our childhood to be oppressive rather than helpful and guiding. So the precepts are to no killing or violence is number 1. Not taking what's not given or not stealing is number 2. Not causing harm with our sexuality. Number 4 is wise speech, meaning kind, timely, and useful. And number 5 is not taking intoxicants that cause heedlessness. And the motive for taking these on as practices and understanding them to be practices and that we're human and we're on a journey, the motive is dedicating ourselves to goodness for the sake of our own peace and ultimately supporting peace for others and, in the wider sense, all beings. The precepts express our innate compassion, and they are protections. They help us, they bring us closer to what in Buddhism is called the bliss of blamelessness, and they help us with protecting others. We're not causing as much harm to others when we're practicing with these. Rick Hansen describes it as a type of generosity when we're practicing with integrity to give no one cause to fear you. Bhikkhu Bodhi, beloved monk and scholar in the Theravadan tradition, says, by the observation of the 5 precepts, one gives fearlessness, love, and benevolence to all beings. If one human being can give security and freedom from fear to others by their behavior, that's the highest form of dana or generosity one can give, not only to humankind, but to all living beings. So I'm going to share my screen for a sec. Some of you have seen these, maybe all of you have. These are the precepts. So when one goes on retreat, the place where one encounter in this practice, in Vipassana practice, where we encounter the precepts most often is when we go on a retreat. They're chanted at the beginning of the retreat as a way to create safe enough community. And you can think that if any one of these precepts were practiced around the world, it would just transform the world entirely. It'd make it so much safer. So you may have seen these if you've been on retreat. So what I'm going to offer now is that I will chant. Please join me if you know these in Pali, and then say them in English. And if these are speaking to you right now, I invite you to speak them. The speaking of them joins them up with this deep intention for peace and well-being. So I invite you to speak them with me. The 5 precepts. Anatipata Vairamani Sikapadam Samadhyami. For the sake of training, I undertake the precept to abstain from the taking of life. Adina Dana Vairamani Sikapadam Samadhyami. For the sake of training, I undertake the precept to not take that which is not given. Kamesu Michakara Vairamani Sikapadam Samadhyami. For the sake of training, I undertake the precept to abstain from sexual misconduct. Musawara Vairamani Sikapadam Samadhyami. For the sake of training, I undertake the precept to abstain from false speech. Sura Merya Maja Pamaratana Vairamani Sikapadam Samadhyami. For the sake of training, I undertake the precept to abstain from intoxicants that cause heedlessness. Okay. There's a lot more to be said, but that's a little tip of the iceberg on integrity. And I just want to open it up now. If anybody, let me know how this is landing for you. Any places where you're getting caught or bugged, or anything that you appreciate or like, or any questions or comments, it's all invited right now. Either here, just unmute to share, or as Madeline mentioned, if you prefer to just type something into the chat, Madeline can read your comment aloud. And it's totally okay if you don't have anything to share right now. Jennifer.
I was just curious about the quote that you read, where I can find that, or where we can find that if we want to read it ourselves.
Yes, the long quote at the beginning,
Yeah,
the Parmes treatise.
yeah.
Yes, I found that. I'm sure there are different places to find it online, and let me put the name of it in the chat for you. But I found it. Maybe you're familiar with Insight Redwood City, which is the Sangha that Gil Fronsdal and Andrea Fella lead up near Palo Alto. And they have a wonderful website with lots of resources, and I found it there. But
Oh,
I'll put so if you go to, I think you just Google Insight Redwood City, you'll find their site, and then they have
okay,
a resources page. And if you look under Paramis, there's a virtue section. And then it was,
okay,
I found it. Yeah.
okay,
But let me also put the um, name of the source in the chat.
okay. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. There you go. Any other thoughts about this right now?
I think it's really timely, and I certainly appreciated it very much. I've been curious a lot. There's been a lot of conversation in some of the teachings and communities that I've come together in on some of the monastic morals. And so you asked what keeps you in integrity, and I think, obviously making everything a practice certainly does. But do you have any insight in some of the monastic morals that you could share? Because I think that what you brought forth essentially is, practicing integrity, and those are some of the cornerstones that really help keep that alive. And I loved how you brought up that that was before wisdom. Really these elements are so essential in coming forth and being in the world with integrity. So I appreciate everything, Landed, that you said, and I think it's timely and was very deeply appreciated today. So yeah,
Thank
thank
you, Pam.
you. You're welcome.
I think the monastic sort of guidelines or morals begin with these five that we just looked at. Those are the foundational ones. And if that's all we were monastics ever worked with, that's, they're not cut and dried, like say the first one, and to not kill. So we can start with, okay, so I'm not going to kill another human being. That's a fairly easy commitment to make. And then the question then, that we can go out to an edge and farther edges with all of them. And so some monastics, many monastics, but not all, go on to then commit to vegetarianism. Many do. In fact, in the Pure Land tradition of Buddhism, if you're not a vegetarian, you're not considered a Buddhist, which is pretty incredible. But there's lots of people who need or choose to eat meat. And so the invitation is, to take each precept and then work with it almost as a reflection or a philosophical invitation to see what will support a greater sense of the bliss of blamelessness for me. And we each find our own way with that outside of the basics. One of the things, the one about sexuality, to not cause harm with sexuality, one of the things that I personally really appreciate is that when you read and study that one more, well, for monastics, it's celibacy because they're using that energy of sexuality and channeling it to help them focus on awakening. But for us lay people, the instruction is simply to not cause harm with our sexuality. And then as we study more deeply, in the Buddhist texts, both ancient and current, it's very clear, don't, you know, non-consensual sex with children, sex with married people, don't cause harm. But one thing I really appreciate that shows up in Buddhism is not only in the ancient texts, no shaming of same sex, mutually consensual same sex relations. But in current day, like in Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings around sexuality, to not hurt or judge others who are choosing to be in mutually consensual same-sex relationships. And as a lesbian myself, I appreciate that, because there's a lot of, as you're well aware, shaming and blaming of the LGBT community in wider mainstream culture. But to get to your main question, it's mostly those, expanding on those. And I see we've gotten ourselves to 1 o'clock already. Good grief. Time goes fast. I really appreciate your hanging out for this time, and I'll dedicate may the merit of our time together be for the benefit of all beings, including ourselves. May all beings be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. May all beings know peace and the causes of peace. And may we be held in love.